there is opportunity everywhere. There's probably opportunity in the most bizarre spaces out there. Kaushik and I started this company out of our living room, and that's how Whodat started. That led to getting our first customer, which was Urban Ladder. We got Target as a customer, and we were like, we have AR, who wants AR?
And that is when Byju happened.
That's why Byju happened.
Byju's is the world's most funded EdTech startup. By the end of 2022, Byju's had raised nearly $6.3 billion in funding from investors across the US, China, Qatar, Belgium, and India. In late 2019, Sriram's startup Whodat was one of Byju's early acquisitions.
From the first time we met them till the term sheet was 6 days. And just as the product started getting ready, the pandemic hit. We had somewhere around 50 million users as a company in the beginning of 2020. And I think at the end of 2020, we had 100 million users. And then we started acquiring more companies. Like Akash was doing nearly $1 billion of its own. Great Learning was another product that was doing north of $100 million. Osmo was doing about $100 million. Things were great.
Once worth $22 billion, today this decacorn's valuation is effectively zero. When did it start to go wrong? And what happened?
I'm not even trying to cover up some of the things that we should not have done as a company, but even before that, I'd like to kind of call out that there were exceptional teams who had built exceptional products. So much of the story that we're still waiting to hear. Yes, we did not get majority of our winnings as part of what we should have got.
Hypothetically, if everything had gone right, what would have that amounted?
Maybe the tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
The journey of building a company is so hard that you need reasons to go back into that ice cold water.
Sriram, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
And it's fantastic to be here with you in the startup capital of the world.
Yes.
Talking about your own journey as an entrepreneur, twice, thrice over, and all the various learnings along the way.
Yep.
But let's go back for a minute to your childhood. How did you get into technology and wanting to start something yourself?
I spent a bunch of time between Bangalore and Chennai in my early days. Moved to Mumbai, which was Bombay back then, and spent really most of my childhood in Mumbai, which was fantastic. That kind of eventually led me to university in Bangalore, dropped out of university.
Okay, what were you studying and why did you drop out?
Engineering, studying engineering, dropped out because there was just no fit in terms of what was being taught versus what I was passionate about. I was lucky enough to have parents who dealt with that behavior. It's not easy to listen to your kid coming back home at the end of, I think, the first semester. And I was basically like, listen, this is not happening. I'm interested in different things. And eventually moved into the area where I had a real passion, which was designing video games. And so I studied building video games, basically. And that sparked the rest of my career.
So where did you study, designing and building video games?
So this was at the University of Wales. They had a small offshore campus in Chennai. To be honest, a lot of it was just me trying to find an excuse to do something while I figured out what actually to do. And I was a big fan of video games.
Okay.
I saw my first computer when I was I think about 11 or 12 years old. My dad got a computer at home, and I still remember the first thing I saw was Sesame Street. I saw the Sesame Street game, which was, I think, a game built for 5-year-olds. I saw it when I was 12 years old, and it still blew my mind. Just watching pixels move on screen, it really felt magical. That led me to becoming a gamer and eventually becoming a game developer because I was just so deeply fascinated.
So what happened after college?
Did a bunch of pretty random things. One of the cool things was there's this international game development competition that happens in Scotland each year called Dare to be Digital. The core concept is teams that are in kind of their college age group come to Scotland from all over the world. And within 3 months, you build a game from concept to finish. And then you get to showcase it at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. We were 19 years old. This was just a great opportunity to leave the country when someone else was paying for it. Had not left the country until then, and put together a team of 5 noobs, and we called ourselves newbies. And we built a game called color scheme, which was a game about a ball that roams around the universe collecting colors, and each of the colors give you powers. And the reason why I chose a game about colors is because I am partially colorblind. And so it was just fun for me to be able to write code that did the job of the colors changing, even though I couldn't actually see the colors. And put together a team from India. We had a fifth member from Scotland. We spent 3 months together living in Scotland. We built a game and we showcased it to over 10,000 people at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival when we were 19 years old.
So what did that opportunity and being on that stage, presenting to 10,000 people do for you?
It gave 4 of us, the noobs, confidence that when we actually care about something and we put in the work behind it when no one's watching, right? It's like when you burn the midnight oil on a Saturday night when you don't need to. There's no boss standing in front of you asking you to do it. You're doing it because you care about the quality of the game. You want it to be fun. You want to put finishing touches to it. You feel like it's your work, and so you want to feel proud about it. You don't want to let your team members down. These are great feelings to have, and you only have these feelings when you maybe respect the team and you respect the work that you're doing. And that feeling made me feel like I think I'll be okay. It's okay to not be great at a bunch of things. Have this very different
sort of path. And
yeah, you can basically excel at a bunch of different things. And what actually matters is getting up the skill ladder in something. In many ways, it actually doesn't matter what that thing is. Of course, eventually, the thing that you excel at, people need to want it. Or else, if you're the only one who wants it, no one cares.
Yeah.
And so, but the first step of that, I feel, is not to worry about what other people care about, but is to worry about what you care about and then find who else cares about it. So that was the first time it kind of became clear that we could build something that was unique and special that we were proud of.
And that's very interesting what you say, that, the first step is to figure out what you care about, right? And find other people, who care somewhat equally about the same thing so you can build something interesting. And then you'll figure it out, right? And this is almost contrarian to how a lot of startup entrepreneurs do it. You look at the market, you look at here's an opportunity, and you then try to go and figure what's going to work for that opportunity. At least that, in theory, that's what you're supposed to do. But we don't talk enough about what is your vibe and where is your flow. Because if you don't have that flow, this whole beautiful intersection of what you love doing and potentially, therefore, then here's how you discover that opportunity and here's the opportunity. Yeah. When that doesn't happen, it's very hard to sustain the ups and downs of entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I feel we don't talk enough about this.
Yes.
About the joy. As the other day when we caught up over coffee, we were talking about the reason we're doing these things, right? It's almost because A, we love doing this. B, we don't know how else to be.
Yeah. Right?
And I do think somewhere a lot of the conversation around entrepreneurship is about, hey, how much funding did you raise? How's your product doing? Or how's your platform doing? Or that, what a great success story, man. Oh, too bad it didn't work out, Let's talk about the failures and the learnings. But it innately so comes down to intuitively what is it that you love doing.
Yeah. I think there is this, I do think that there is this false prophecy that people have where they talk about scope. That thing has a lot of scope, or that thing there's an incredible amount of opportunity there. I've always looked at it as like, is that my opportunity? There is opportunity everywhere. There's probably opportunity in the most bizarre spaces out there. And we get to see that all the time, right? Like you watch, YouTube is a simple way where you can find people who are incredible at extremely non-common niches. And the reason why they're good at it is not because there is a clear opportunity for everyone. It's just because because something is so close to them that they're willing to put in
the
thousands
time.
of cycles to get good at it.
Yeah.
And so, which is why the core of it actually is motivation. If you are not motivated to if the thing that you're working on doesn't give you sleepless nights in terms of like, how do I make it better? If it doesn't make you wake up in the morning and like be almost restless to get to work, to be able to fix issues around it. I just feel like
then you're not in the right path.
The flame burns out very quickly. It's not to say that I haven't done a bunch of things like that.
We all have. We've all tried different things, because it's also the way you find out saying, I'm not having fun. Yes. This is not fun. Yes. This is not for me.
I think fun is if you don't feel fun while you're in the process, you're probably in the wrong business for yourself. And fun does not necessarily mean that everything is great every day, but the problems that space throws at you is fun for you to solve. Yes. It's a fun puzzle. If you think of it as like, oh my God, why am I dealing with this mess today? And even in the best case scenarios,
you do end up feeling that sometimes. Some days are that, yes.
But you have to pick something where your heart knows that that's the space that you enjoy playing in. And hopefully with that and with some luck and lots of hard work, something comes out. Because at the end of the day, success is not guaranteed. So even if you fail, you kind of want to walk out of it going, I did something that I thought was pretty fun. Too bad it didn't work. And those are different things. But start with the thing where you enjoy playing the game that you're in the first place, or else it just becomes too hard. If you like, at least maybe for some people it works where you like start by analyzing a market and choose a TAM. It does not work for me. I prefer doing things bottoms up. So I'm like, who has this problem? What problem do you have? And like, am I interested in solving that?
So it's a bit more intuitive. The guidance comes a bit more intuitively
it is extremely
for you.
Intuitive. And then as you keep building, then you have to, now you need to put the structure to it and all of that. And now I need to involve other people to join my crazy idea. And so now I need to put some structure around it because it has to succeed beyond my wild imagination.
Yeah. Now, these are all the learnings that you've had along the way also, not just as a 19-year-old. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Out in Scotland. So let's talk about that journey. When did you first start building something? And what are the different things you've tried? And what are the different things you've learned up until the acquisition by Byju's?
Right. In my late teens, I built a bunch of games, moved back to India in the early 2010s. And my first job was actually in 2010 in an AI company. It was called AI Solve. It was a company in 2010. It was a tiny little startup. And it was 6 engineers building a combination of hardware, software. It was actually pretty wild. We were trying to build like these real world physics simulations for if you were an electrician and you had to go into a really high intensity situation. How do you play around with those scenarios without actually putting yourself in danger? So putting yourself in like virtual environments where you can kind of test these things out. It was a great learning experience. That's actually where I met Kaushik, my co-founder at Whodat. And what that experience taught me is like I learned a bunch of really hard technical stuff, which was incredibly helpful. But it also taught me how not to build companies. And in many ways, that has been a continuous learning for me. And one of the core things around that is, again, culture, right? Like, do you want your team to feel like they actually are part of the mission and they own part of the value, making sure that team members actually share a portion of the wins? All of those things are like core parts of building a culture. And a lot of that was missing in the early company, which is why almost a year later, both me and Kaushik left the company. I spent a little bit more time in another startup, which eventually did not pan out. And then in 2013, Kaushik and I started Whodat. And Whodat was just formed out of a very core realization that both Kaushik and I were deeply technical. And we loved working in technologies that almost felt magical. Right. We were huge believers of the Arthur Clarke quote of any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And we were big magic fans. We loved technology that put a smile on people's faces. And for us, that technology seemed like it was going to be augmented and virtual reality. Obviously, almost a decade later, we're still building that future. Mm-hmm. It was a hunch, and we said the technology is getting pretty good, and we would like to be one of the first companies in India to build an AR platform out of India. And in some ways, we were mildly successful, and in other ways, we were not. And it was a long, hard 6-year journey and I can give you one anecdote from that, right, in terms of how the company started. Kaushik and I started this company out of our living room. We were living together and like building the company out of our home. There was a hacking competition happening in Sri Lanka, organized by the head of Google India. We were selected as the first startup to actually participate in that and represent India. We didn't have money to buy tickets. The head of Google India at that point in time, Rajan Anandan, called me, and within 5 minutes, I was like, listen, I don't have money to buy tickets. And so he bought us tickets to fly to Sri Lanka. We flew to Sri Lanka. We spent 3 days building the prototype. We won that hacking competition. And that's how Whodat started. And that was really the validation. And the first prototype we built was visualize how furniture looks in your living room. That led to getting our first customer, which was Urban Ladder. And we got Target as a customer. And that kind of, grew.
Mm-hmm. So retail was your focus to start with.
Retail was the first.
Got it.
Honestly, technology was the focus. Yeah. Retail just happened.
The industry that you were tapping into that you could see early revenue from.
Yes. And we knew nothing about retail. To some extent, it was a hammer in search of a nail, right? We were like, we have AR, who wants AR? And turns out retail was picking up at that point in time. Companies like Urban Ladder were doing furniture. And so they had really huge problems of like, listen, we're an online furniture store. How do people see furniture in their home? So we were like, we can help you. And we worked with Rajiv, Ashish and the team back then. And like we built a bunch of really cool products around that. That led to kind of ballooning of our product into different industries. It became retail, real estate, automotive. Then a couple of years later, the company had started generating significant revenues, hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenues. And that's when we raised money from Idea Spring Capital, Mohandas Pai, and Naganand Doraswamy's and Arihant Patni's fund. Arihant was on my board. And we raised about $600,000. Mm-hmm. So not a lot of money. And over sort of the next 2 years, as we built our core IP and our platforms, the real realization that happened was that AR was not going to be becoming mainstream very quickly. The technology had not yet become reliable. And so we knew that if we had to go at it on our own, we would need many years of R&D capital. India at that point of time was also not really R&D first. Yeah. It was tough to convince investors, even though we had a really strong machine learning team. It's really funny. Today, you would see a team with such type of machine learning expertise.
Would be high in demand right now.
Would be extremely in demand right now. And that's why, you have to get the timing right.
Yeah, time and place is everything.
And that led us to eventually come to a question of, can we raise more money? Do we have the ability to? We were an Indian company. There was a lot of concerns from US investors to invest in an Indian company. And so eventually it kind of became very clear that we needed a long-term partner to be able to bring some of our visions to life.
So how old were you at this point in time?
28, 29.
Yeah. So you're a 28-year-old with a 15-member team, early revenue, 600,000 in funding, and trying to figure where next.
A bunch of IP that needs to be put into work pretty quickly.
And that is when Byju happened.
That's why Byju happened. And
all right.
Yes.
So tell me about the first meeting and onwards, the acquisition.
Yeah.
And the whole journey, the rise and fall.
Yeah. So this is 2019, and we had known about Byju's from the outside. And what happened with Byju was we very quickly found a very strong use case. And it was, in many ways, it was the perfect storm for us to be able to do the deal with them, because Byju at that point in time had products from grade 4 to grade 10. They were looking to expand into the younger age groups. And for the younger age groups, you need to create content that was a lot more like games. We had a bunch of game development and game design expertise. We were also going to create products that utilized AR and VR and all of these different technologies within the products. And so they already had that intent, and they had just acquired a company in the US called Osmo, who was doing computer vision related games for kids. And we actually met the Osmo founders.
Like before your deal with Byju happened, you met the founders. Okay.
So Byju and us had a common investor in Mohandas Pai.
Okay.
Mohandas Pai was the first investor in Byju's. Mohandas Pai's fund was an investor in us. And so our investors got us in touch with them. We met the senior leadership of Osmo. And very quickly, we realized that we were talking the same language. For many, many reasons, that deal would have not gone through if it wasn't for this perfect storm. Because we were incredibly technical. You needed someone who was equally technical in that same space to understand what you were talking about, right? And Pramod, who was the CEO of Osmo, was in Bangalore at just around that time. He was leaving the next day, and we had a bunch of meetings with him, and that really escalated. And basically, I would go and meet the senior leadership of Byju's early in the morning and late in the evenings. And from the first time we met them till the term sheet was 6 days.
Ah, okay. So that moved very fast.
Very fast. And it also gave you a sense of the company, right? Like when we met other companies, we had to really sell ourselves from a VP to a senior VP to like the next person. And so there would be so many gatekeepers. And we realized very quickly is because no one understood what we were doing technically and could marry that to a business use case who actually had some level of authority. And
could leverage it. We're convinced
could
leverage it.
And with Byju's and the entire leadership team, I think the biggest advantage was just speed. So one was obviously that Kaushik and I deeply cared about education as a use case. Second is this was the first company where our IP was valued, our entire team was absorbed, and our investors walked out with an exit, right? And Kaushik and I also had a partial exit, even though a large part of our exit was still in equity. And it was very important for us to have achieved all of this because it was not just us. We carried a bunch of people along with us. Our investors believed in us. And so we had to make sure that it worked out for everyone. And it did. And Byju and the senior leadership team had the ability to make decisions very, very quickly. And I still remember, honestly, like we had a pretty decent amount of debt on the company. And one of the conversations that I was having in the middle of this is like, that's fine, but what about this debt? And they just cleared it almost instantly. Right. And in the conversation was like, let's get these stresses out of the way and let's talk how we're going to build the future of education. And both the speed, the quality of people that we saw with the Osmo team and even the Byju senior leadership team, it was a company that had a caliber of leadership that you felt was really strong. They had clear intention of moving fast, and they did not mince their words. They told us things exactly how it was, and it went from things went from really the first conversation to a term sheet in 6 days, and they gave us the commitment that they will close, and they did. And so
lovely.
That was phenomenal.
So all of this happened a month before the pandemic.
End of 2019 we got acquired. March 2020 was the pandemic. So about 4-5 months.
Okay, so tell me about those 4 months.
Yeah.
And then that whole explosive growth that happened during the pandemic.
Yeah. So the main reason why we got acquired into Byju's was to build the early learning products. That's why our team was bought in. We jumped right into kind of building the products. We have, at this point in time, we have no idea that there's going to be a pandemic.
Yeah.
And so we're just building. And we were launching pre-kindergarten, kindergarten 1 to 3. Just as the product started getting ready, the pandemic hit in March. The company had never worked remotely until then. One thing to realize is that Byju's as a company was a full stack organization. So we built all the content, we built all the technology, we did all the R&D, and we also had the entire stack of learning curriculum on learning design on top of that. And so it took a lot of hands.
And you had hardware, not just the software and the content too. We had
every single
physical presence.
We had physical presence. There was so many moving pieces that it required people to be at work and build stuff. And the pandemic forced us to be able to go remote very quickly. And thankfully for us, even though the transition of at work to at home was pretty painful. Across the company, we were seeing literally just like millions of downloads of users across all of our platforms just pour in because schools were shut.
People had kids at home. How do you engage them? Yeah.
Schools were shut.
Learning going.
And we were also major sponsors at IPL, which happened in April. And so there were a whole bunch of like there was one part of it was just the pull from the customers, but Byju as a company was also extremely good at putting our word out there. I think for the years that the company was active, people would see us on ads everywhere, both across the two major pillars of Indian advertising, whether it's cricket or Bollywood. And on one side, the systems are breaking because we've never worked remotely and we're trying to figure that whole thing out.
And also this rapid sort of, market acceptance and adoption that's happening.
Yes.
How prepared were you for that? And what numbers are we talking about here?
Millions of users.
So before the pandemic to just a few months into the pandemic, what was the change?
I think we had somewhere around 50 million users as a company in the beginning of 2020. And I think at the end of 2020, we had 100 million users. So that is kind of
doubled in 1 year.
So it's both the existing product lines are blowing up and new product lines are coming live every few weeks, right?
So what's the kind of success you saw for the work that you were doing in that whole sort of rocket ship environment that you were in during the pandemic?
We knew that we had a distribution network within Byju. So most of, at least mine and my team's work was focused on how do you build a great product that customers love.
Yeah.
And we owned that entire piece end to end. And it was an incredible learning experience for us, right? Early learning is one of those stages where all we're trying to do is make you a curious learner. And that is why we had to tackle learning for kids through engagement and fun. And hopefully outcome came as you spent more time. There was a fair amount of trial and error in that process, right? To figure out who exactly the user and the customer is. You realize that you have two stakeholders. The child is not really able to make too many decisions by themselves. The child doesn't own all of their time. Parents decide how the child spends their time. But at the same time, if you make a product that the kids don't pull by themselves, there's no incentive.
Yes.
So it's really walking that extremely thin line of showing value to the parent by showing that there is actually outcomes. There has to be a difference between watching a YouTube video and using our product, which is YouTube videos are not a program. Ours is a program that actually delivers value. So we have to communicate that to the parent. And for the child, we're just trying to create this really fun experience. And that wasn't easy. We did a major collaboration with Disney, a worldwide collaboration that allowed us to merge Disney's IP and characters into the storytelling and actually teach you things. So an example of what we would do is, give an example of Lion King. Simba would be running around in sort of the jungle and he'll see a bunch of antelopes and we'll use that as a hook to get you to count the number of antelopes, and that's how we teach you counting. In so many ways that worked. If you make learning really fun and really engaging and you bring in different formats of learning, whether it's games or whether it's worksheets or whether it's videos, the reality was people were adopting our product because of the pandemic and kids didn't have schools. But it took us about 18 months to get that product to a shape where, we were actually proud of it and we thought it worked really well. And so a lot of the effort went into doing that. From a growth standpoint, we saw tremendous growth across this whole time. Literally within, I think, about 18 months, we had about 10 million free users within the product. And that was the core model. The core model was you get a lot of people to install our free app, they try it, they get convinced, and our salesperson reaches out to you and convinces you to buy the paid product. And so the entire machinery was on our favor. We had products that were being sold across all states in India and in the US. We launched our product in the US. We were live in north of 20,000 stores across Target, Walmart, Best Buy, Amazon.com. And all of this was accomplished within the first sort of 2.5 years of, us joining forces with them. And this is just one of 10 products within the Byju's ecosystem, right? So the company within that time had already hit $1 billion in kind of revenue across the board.
This is Byju as a whole.
This is Byju as just Byju. And then we started acquiring more companies. Like Akash was doing nearly $1 billion of its own. Great Learning was another product that was doing north of $100 million. Osmo was doing about $100 million. We had Epic that was doing pretty substantial revenues. And that was the entire energy within the company. The products that we were launching were working. Things were scaling. There were obviously a bunch of roadblocks, but it was the kind of teams that you kind of want to bet on. At that point in time, we had offers to go public. And so it was great times.
Got it.
Things were great.
That's fantastic. What happened after 2 years?
Yeah, I think
Because we've all read different things in the news.
Yeah.
And now looking back, it's almost like there's a lot of focus on Byju as an individual. But I think for you as an entrepreneur who's in the inside building, you have your own lens on this, right? You have your own opinions on this and basis your own experience on what you do or do not know.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a lot of learnings that you take forward from that experience.
Yes.
Right. Into what you're doing now and what you will do in the future.
Yes.
I think people would love to hear about that.
Yeah. There's so much of the story that we're still waiting to hear. So that's the first caveat. I think the saddest thing about what happened was that there was so much value within the company that got eroded. I'm not even trying to cover up some of the things that we should not have done as a company, but even before that, I'd like to kind of call out that there were exceptional teams who had built exceptional products. And
so you have a lot of respect for the individuals and the talent and the skill and the possibility of what could have been. Right.
Because there were so many teams who genuinely believed in the mission and put in, countless hours working weekends and really pushing themselves to kind of build stuff.
Yeah.
And I think within a lot of the chaos, sometimes those are forgotten. It's forgotten that the company did have real customers and real revenues. It's very hard to believe that shrinks down to where it is, right?
When did it start to go wrong? And what happened?
I think it really felt like we over leveraged ourselves into doing too many things because it felt like the opportunity was for us to take, right? Sometimes when things are going really good and you want to do a bunch of new things, we have to take the time to stabilize the old things before jumping on a bunch of new things. And there were definitely moments where it felt like there were too many different priorities for us to keep jumping around with. And it still felt manageable because we were extremely capitalized and we were able to kind of go bring in teams. But just having capital and hiring teams is not sufficient. We have to build the right organizational structure. We have to be able to systems. If there are redundancies in the teams, you kind of have to cut that. And none of these things negatively mattered until the funding started slowing down.
And
right?
This was coming out of the pandemic, right? So
this was coming out of the pandemic.
2023,
2022-23 is probably where things started getting...
It's like a house of cards that started collapsing.
It still didn't feel like a house of cards. It just felt like there was a funding crunch. And it just felt like we have to make some tough decisions. And we all did make a bunch of tough decisions. We trimmed down on teams. We cut a few products that didn't make sense. But the pace at which we were burning through cash was not still sustainable. And that's what eventually sort of snowballed into what we saw. And internally, just giving a sense of what I knew, we know that the leadership was very, very focused on cutting costs and trying to build the company into efficiency. And we were all hoping that is what was going to happen. But for a whole bunch of different reasons, it didn't. And we didn't know what those reasons were. And that's around when we started seeing the issues with board members quitting and all of that stuff. And so the problems just became much larger.
So that actually didn't happen.
It was difficult to know what was really going on because a lot of it was also, we are hearing about things from the press. There wasn't a lot of clarity internally, even from the leadership. I guess they were trying to figure out what to do. And the consequence of that just became that, week on week, you'd start hearing about how we have to shut down different products or do something else. But it eventually did not kind of soft land.
So how did you and the people around you feel, as all of this was unraveling, as you kept seeing things in the news? You obviously had this product that was doing well, $50 million in annual revenue, just 0 to 50 million in 2 years. And then suddenly there's all this instability or questions that are coming up, which weren't there. Everything was hunky-dory until a few months ago, right?
Yeah.
Everything was I mean, this is the best place in the world you could be. This is the biggest success story, he could carve for the company and you could carve for yourselves.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So when it started to shift, what were some of the emotions you went through? And what were people around you going through?
To begin with, there's obviously some level of denial. In retrospective, wishful thinking doesn't really help. But it's just, you're human. And, many times you're hoping for things to just get sorted out. There was a very clear realization that Kaushik and I had soon after moving into Byju's was like, it was not, we have to keep telling ourselves, it's not our company. We are like hired employees who've come in to do work and to push the limit. Yes, we own some equity in the company, but it does not make us owners, right? Like I had to be very clear about how I thought about that to myself. And as an employee, there's only that much power that you have, or there's only that much clarity that you have about the situation. The communication wasn't very well managed at that point in time. There would be large moments of silence, which in retrospect, obviously is not a great way to deal with it because your teams are just sitting there being anxious. If people are hearing more news about your company from the press than they are hearing from you, that is a problem. And it just wasn't managed very well. And so there was a lot of anxiety, but it felt like we would turn around the situation. Again,
so there was optimism.
Because we had real customers.
Yes.
If it was something where it's like we had like made up all our customers or something, like that would have been, then we would have known what we were doing. But like, there were real customers. There was real value there. And you eventually come to know that things are just too far and you're not able to do many things. And that's when you also are forced to sort of take decisions, right? Like, if the company has an incredibly large amount of debt that is so large that it like shadows all of the revenues that you're generating, at that point in time, then like, what is the point of the team and the product that we're building? Because it's almost like there's a giant tsunami that's going to hit you. And we tried doing whatever we could, but at some point in time, it became very evident that whether it's our small product or some other product is not going to come and like change the course of the company. In fact, the teams themselves now suddenly become a liability on the books, even though it was no fault of their own. And it's just a brutal realization. In the beginning, you have wishful thinking that eventually leads to just a lot of stress. And finally, you are, finally reality has to take a check. And the check there is, sorry, we don't have any money, so we can't pay you anymore. And so you have to take the hard call.
So what were some of the things that you had to do as a VP, heading up early learning products? And how big was your team at that point in time?
So I managed a team. I took care of product design, worked very closely with engineering. Kaushik managed engineering, so I worked pretty closely with him. And all of the functions that came around product, whether it was user research, data science, all of that reported under me. In many ways, we tried to run our product as a startup within a startup. Because there were many, many startups within the company, right? Like there were like 10 to 20 acquisitions and there were many internal products. And so a lot of the products operated with a sense of independence. Mm-hmm. And in many ways that allowed us to just focus on the customer, make sure that we're doing things right. And while all of those are great, that is still does not discount the fact that we are still part of a larger company, and the fate of the larger company and everything that happens in the larger company affects us.
Also dictates your fate.
It does. And so in many ways, we went back and forth to be like, if you have to pay attention to the thing that's happening outside with the larger company, I don't know what we'll do. So the only thing that you can do is
focus on what's in front of you.
Focus on what's in front of us. And so we just had to stay focused and do our part while we were hoping that everything else figures itself out.
Got it.
Yeah.
So how big was the team?
The early learning team was probably product engineering all put together was like a few hundred people, including content and everything else.
So 11 months on, once the funding winter had set in and the realities of it started hitting, how did things unravel?
Things unraveled pretty quickly. We had to we had to go through multiple rounds of layoffs. And the final round of layoff, between the first round and the final round was probably about a year. We kept cutting 20%, and eventually the last bit it didn't make sense to sort of keep anyone on payroll, and so we had to let go of the whole team, and I let go of the whole team and eventually fired myself. Yeah.
And what was it like for you emotionally, just
Very
going
rough.
through all of that?
Very rough, because it takes so much to build a product that anyone cares about, right? Like, it takes a lot of effort to build something, and in no way did we build a product that was perfect or didn't have any issues. There were lots of problems, and but at the same time, there were many parts of the product that customers really loved, and we had already taken money from them, and so it was our duty to deliver on that promise. And so the hard part was disappointing customers after spending a few years building something that they loved. And the second hard part was to tell the teams that, the fact that they had put in so much hard work and all of that didn't materialize to anything else. And then the last part of it is just, just trying to think through this whole experience and sort of coming down to zero, where you don't have anything else going on. And that's when I eventually decided to leave the company. Maybe a few months down the line, they would have asked me to leave anyway.
Oh, how many rounds of layoffs did you have to do?
Like 3 or 4.
Okay. And that was very like every second or third month.
It was over a span of a year, right? So it was like every 3-4 months you'll have to do a round. And so if you just think about it, by the time you do the third round of layoff, it's like, what is the belief? What do I even tell that person? It's like, the only thing I can say is that I have no idea if there's going to be another one. And so if you do want to look out for other things, I understand that, right? And that's around when you start saying things like that to your teams when you're working for a company, that's when you kind of don't have too much control over the situation.
And you don't have clarity.
You don't have clarity.
Yeah.
And so it's, in many ways, it's better to let them know at that point in time that you don't have clarity, because or else at some point in time you make they really want you to be honest in terms of what do you and it makes sense that they expect that out of you, right? Like, you hired them and you told them a bunch of stuff to bring them into the company, and then suddenly now you become, no, sorry, I'm part of this company, so I can't share that. It's not cool.
So this was already early 2024?
This was
late
23, early 24.
Got it.
Around then. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
So I'm aware that when you went in, when you were acquired, you didn't put any money in your own account, right? It was more the investors getting their, exit and employees, and then you and Kaushik went in with sort of a paycheck, and you had equity in Byju's, you had shares in Byju's. So did you and Kaushik walk away with any money at all after the few years of building this up?
We walked away with some part of the cash, but we left majority on the table because that was the deal that we went in doing.
Hypothetically, if everything had gone right, what would have that amounted to?
Maybe the tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
I think the core of at least my experience, which is why I don't feel too bad about my own experience, is I walked away with a lot more money than what I had walked into Byju's with, right? And it gave me the opportunity to take a bunch of time out, travel, really not have to worry about money for a while. And so it was good from that standpoint. Mm-hmm. But the bet that we had sort of taken was we will not take any cash up front, and so we'll take the majority of the winnings later. That did not pan out.
Got it. I'm sure there was a moment when you looked at, hey, this could have been, and then it's not, right? And the emotions around that for you as a young entrepreneur, hungry to, prove something to yourself, hungry to have a great success story, right? And the learnings out of that experience.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about that? How personal was it?
It was, there was a lot of confusion. It wasn't even anger, because for a while I was I don't know what's going on. Why, what just happened, right? 8 months ago we were building a product with 300 people. What happened? Why is no one here, and why are we out of the company? And so a lot of it is actually just shock. And it took a while for that shock to kind of unravel. And beyond a point, I've realized that there isn't too much of analysis that you can do around it. It's just you try to do certain things. We knew before getting into it that we are in the risk business where majority of everything fails. And so when you think about it like that, it does not feel very sad. It just feels like this is how things panned out. The hard part for me was just products getting destroyed and sort of...
Those are your babies.
The products, the customers, it's more like, it's like starting with the customers and then what happened to the products and then eventually the teams were the thing that I feel most sad about. Because there were so many situations where I think people tried getting other employment opportunities and there was this blacklist on Byju employees and like people weren't hiring them and all of that stuff. And a lot of it was unfortunate because...
Why do you think that happened?
I don't know. I think there was a lot of different types of perceptions about the Byju's ecosystem. A lot of this is pretty heavily reported about some sales tactics and sales behaviors that were not appreciated, and they weren't even appreciated by people within the company, right? Like we were very strong. We had a lot of opposition around a bunch of those things. But on the counter side, there were phenomenal teams in the Byju's ecosystems, and so putting this kind of like blanket thing of like, if someone comes from Byju's, don't accept them would be very foolish because people have, whether it is on the marketing side or the product side or the engineering side, there were really teams that outdid themselves, or else we would not
have gotten to where you got. Yeah. Now I know that sort of around the same time that your product was taking off, you were also diagnosed with a health issue that has changed sort of the course of some of the choices you would have made in life, right? So tell me about that and tell me about, how you cope with that, because that's like a high intense life in a sense.
Yeah.
Trying to build something that's big and go through all the motions that come with it and deal with a personal health crisis, right? Tell me, what was actually the issue that was diagnosed and what's the journey with that been like? And in parallel to your own journey of trying to be, a startup entrepreneur a second or third time over now.
So I've had I've worn glasses for most of my life because I thought I had myopia, but when I was basically turning 30, around the time that the acquisition happened, I started noticing that I wasn't able to code as much or like do things, and I'm an extremely visual person, and so I was like, something's wrong, and I went and got myself checked, and I realized it's actually a rare retinal condition called cone rod dystrophy. So it affects the cones and the rods in your retina, which basically has a bunch of varied type of impact on your eyes. There's like some level of color blindness, and it also mostly affects your central vision, which really affects text. And that was a big deal because text is everywhere.
Yeah, and also, you were a visual person. You were building video games. Everything. Your business was visual. The product was about the visual storytelling.
Yes. It was very ironic. It was like the thing that, it was one of those things, right? It's like life has its own plan for you. So you think that you want to build a career on something, and then suddenly you're like, that thing that I've spent the last 15 years getting really good at is getting super hard for me to do.
So there is no treatment?
There is no treatment known today. Yes.
And is it a progressive condition?
It is progressive, yes.
Okay. So 5 years from the time that you've been diagnosed, where are you at? How much has it progressed?
Not too bad.
Okay.
I have been getting myself scanned and checked every year, and so far, so good. I'm generally a healthy person. There's a whole bunch of different medical procedures, from like gene therapy to other things that are, reportedly around the corner. We don't know whether that is 10 years or 20 years, but I believe that a lot of these diseases within our time frame will have solutions. So fingers crossed.
Fabulous. So now, when things didn't work out at Byju's, and you're also living with this degenerative eye condition, right? What next? What did you do next?
I packed up my bags and put all my stuff into storage in Bangalore, and I just left Bangalore. About literally like the day I quit Byju, I think 2 days later I just left. I just traveled. I spent a bunch of time at Ayurvedic clinics in Kerala, taking care of my eyes. Traveled around Southeast Asia, spent 6-8 months in different parts of Southeast Asia. And I was in a Muay Thai camp in Thailand, and I've spent a bunch of time just chilling on a beach in Philippines. But I would find myself spending a lot of time, maybe a few months into my travels, just building prototypes with a bunch of new AI tools that came in. And in many ways, I've been working in machine learning for almost 11 years now. And I was incredibly fascinated with what was happening in AI today, especially with AI coding and the ability to really multiply what you can do as a coder in the space right now. And that made me realize that I am incredibly interested in building again. And it also made me realize that like traveling is fun, taking long vacations is fun, sitting on a beach is great. But after a while, I get very bored. I need to be working with a bunch of interesting people solving problems that I care about. Like that's what I enjoy doing. The US was I wanted like a change in scene. And because I'd lived in Bangalore for almost like 12 years, then I also slowly started getting annoyed about how chaotic that city was becoming. And so I was like, I just wanted a different location to go build. And there is nothing like the Bay Area for what you can do here. And I had spent a bunch of time even as part of Byju's and even as part of my previous startup in the Bay Area. And so I knew some people here. And so I just moved here, and not even with the intention of starting a company, because I did not immediately start a company. I spent a few months just building stuff, just hanging out with founders, helping people out on their companies, just doing whatever. But what I found through that process was building products, working on problems that I care about. That is really where I get most of my energy. And the Bay Area has so much of that energy that, you can really come and you can find really crazy ideas and it's not really considered crazy. And I wanted to see how that felt like to build it here.
So what are you building now? And where and who are you building with?
So when I moved to the Bay Area, I was just living out of Airbnbs. I was building out of my bedroom, and eventually it started getting annoyed and boring. I don't really like to go to too many startup conventions and meet founders because it generally it feels like everyone's got their marketing mode on and everyone's talking about just their successes and everything else, even though I think deep down we all know it's
the realities of the grind. Yes,
the reality is very different, right? Like when we're alone, we have to wipe our tears by ourselves, but we like to put on this show in front of others, and there's a lot of that. And I wanted to not be in that situation, because then you immediately get into like, I've done all these things and had this exit and all that, but the reality is like I was a little lost. I didn't know what I was doing next.
I love that. I love the authenticity of that. And I think we need more of that.
It's scary. It's scary when you do certain things and then you start again and like, you don't know what you're doing. You wonder how you're spending your time. It's also this, when you have a little bit of success and you don't necessarily need to go back into the workplace to get a job and to like support yourself and your family or something like that, then you really wonder like, what can I do that is actually meaningful with the time that I have? And I was actually lucky enough to find a great community within South Park Commons. South Park Commons is an early stage fund and community of technical folks within San Francisco. I didn't know much about it. I knew Aditya and Ruchi, who were the founders of it, because of their successes. They were very early employees of Facebook. They'd also taken Dropbox public. Aditya was a CTO of Dropbox. And so I'd known about them, but did not know about SPC, and applied, got through, became a member. And it was incredible. It was a whole lot of technical people who are back in their -1 to 0 journey again, which I thought was an incredibly unique concept. I think life actually begins at -1. It doesn't start at 0, because sometimes you're so lost that you just want to like navigate to the point where you're like, oh, so this is what I'm actually supposed to do, and that is 0. But where do you start when you don't even know what you're supposed to do? And what that really helped was that it put a whole bunch of really talented but lost individuals in a place. So there's incredibly high talent density, but there was also a deep openness. And I still remember Aditya in the first session was like, this is a place to be incredibly vulnerable. And if you're not, like, you're not welcome here. And I felt that was really refreshing, because it was all a lot of us.
That is, yeah.
A lot of us spoke to each other just going, it's like really scary. It's scary to start all over again. Even though it's really funny, but like you've done this a couple of times before.
And you want to. You're there because you also want to.
You want to.
But it's true that even though you want to, there are all these emotions around it, right? Yes. That it goes back to you facing your own deepest fears and failures and successes and having a fresh lens on it almost, right?
Yes.
So that brings me to the question, compared to when you first started Whodat, you and Kaushik first started Whodat, to now when you're starting this.
Yeah.
And I know Kaushik's not on this journey with you, and I will come to that. I want to, that's something very interesting to talk about. But do you see a shift in motivations, reasons to start up for your own self?
The first time around, it was just like, this sounds cool. Do you want to start a company? Yes, let's start a company. And we started a company. We didn't think too much about it. And maybe if we had thought too much about it, we wouldn't have started the company. And so maybe that was the right thing to do in the first place. This time around, the question of like the why are we doing this? And why do I have a unique leverage to solve this problem? Why should this be my company? Why not someone else's company? Why am I uniquely positioned to win in the space? Is it a real problem? Is it starting from real customers? Those are things that at least like mattered deeply to me. And so most of my time at maybe the first 4 months in South Park Commons was just
navigating all of these questions.
These feelings. A lot of it starts from feelings. I feel like something should be done about something. And then a good sort of lesson for people is that when you have feelings about like, this is a problem that I wonder why no one's doing something about that I deeply care. And if that feeling keeps coming back to you, you should recognize it and do something about it. Either validate it and say it's not worth it, or try doing something in that space. Because usually what happens is that ideas come and ideas go. But when something just keeps annoying you and tells you like, because you kind of in your head feel the world should be a different place, but it's not. And I don't understand why it's not. And if you keep having that feeling, you should do something about it. And one part of it is soul searching. Another part of it is also validating whether is this just my own feelings or is it grounded in reality?
Yeah.
Right. And so both of them are important. I think you first have to have the feeling, right? And it's both these things. It's like, I deeply care about something, and so do a bunch of other people.
And it's necessary too.
And it's because like people really want it. And that's another thing, right? It's very hard to build and scale and sell products that are actually not needed. And so it was very important that at least that I picked a problem that was not kind of like a nice to have, but more like, if you can't do this, then you're in trouble kind of a way. And yeah, that came through a bunch of validation.
Tell me about, how Kaushik and you have chosen such different paths now. Like I know you've started up again now at South Park Commons, and you reached out to him asking if he wants to partner with you again. And what was the response?
See, like I've only had one co-founder so far. Now I do have a new one, and I'll talk about him. But I'd gone on this like 10-year journey with Kaushik. I call him Das. And there were many ups and downs in my startup journey. But the thing that I really lucked out was with the right co-founder, right? I define a right co-founder as you share the same, you have the same goal, you share the same set of values, and you also have extremely complementary skill sets. And that's what it kind of takes to win. You also want that to kind of have a great, fun journey along the way.
And tell me about when you say complementary skill sets, like what was it like? How was it between you and Kaushik?
So even though both of us were technical co-founders, Kaushik is a much better technologist than I am. And so he got to take that realm. On the product side, on the sales side, on the investment side, those are areas where I had to pick those pieces up. It wasn't like that came naturally to me, but I had to pick those pieces up because he was just much better at technology. It took me a decade, but I think I'm getting, I'm okay at it right now.
Got it. Yeah. Got it. So what happened when you reached out to Kaushik this time?
When you have an exit or when you've kind of completed a milestone and you take time and you take a break and you go do other things, life is pretty good. He's doing a bunch of cool stuff right now. He plays ultimate frisbee for India right now. He's actually in Portugal as we speak. He's also working with an organization to go into different schools and teach kids how to play ultimate frisbee around Bangalore. This is keeping him busy.
What did he actually tell you, though? I know you told me this last week. I want you to share it.
He said something along the lines of, man, I'm not ready. It does feel like, the water's too cold and I'm not ready. I don't know if I want to jump back in right now. And I was like, it makes complete sense. I feel the same thing. It's just that I want to jump into that water right now. It was one of these situations where, you kind of assume that you're going to be partners at whatever you do. But the reality is life takes you in different places. Kaushik and I are in incredibly good terms. We've been chatting through this whole process. I wouldn't write anything off.
What are you building now?
My experience with vision loss and the journey that I've been through made me realize a few things. One is that especially if you have symptoms of vision loss, which is genetic, it starts affecting your life, including the way you're productive, including the way you're doing work. And that has a significant impact on your personal life, your professional life, and
community, your support system, everything.
You see these also translated into the underemployment, unemployment numbers. When someone has severe vision disabilities, your chances of being employed goes down by 1/3. Right. When I started spending time looking at the tools that were given to someone who suffered from severe vision disabilities, it was called assistive technologies. So a very rudimentary way of thinking about assistive technologies is glasses. You put glasses on. Glasses is an assistive technology that you put on your eyes that helps you see. A hearing aid is an assistive technology that helps you hear. But when you have retinal conditions, that is not the case. And so the tools that were available were almost a decade old. They didn't represent today's modern design, modern technology influence.
And life.
And
requirements, yeah.
It did not feel like it was software and hardware from 2025. And Luminade was formed with a core hypothesis of what if assistive technologies felt less like a compromising assistive tech. And I would call a compromising assistive tech in this sense as an example would be like a wheelchair. But what if it was less like a wheelchair and more like an Iron Man suit? Right? And the difference between the two is...
One is empowering.
One is empowering and one is limiting. And this is not to take away from those technologies.
Or the use of a wheelchair.
This is not to take away from that. But the question is, should things be better? And I think things should be better. And there are, we live in a world you're in the Bay Area. We have cars that drive themselves.
Yes.
That's a robot that drives themselves. It can come pick you up. It's incredible.
Yeah.
In a world where that is possible, why are we still living with technologies that seem age-old, that don't seem to be working on behalf of the user, where the user has to take most of the strain rather than technology? And that was the core foundation of a company that I started called Luminade. The reason why it's called Luminade is it's like wordplay between lumen, which is shining a light, and aid is like a friend. So it's almost like it's a friend that shines the light in a place where it's dark for you right now. And the core pillars of Luminade has been to sort of give agency and independence to people who kind of need it in that context. And we are starting with the blind and low vision community. And we're building productivity tools that allow them to be a lot more productive, starting with me as the first user.
Got it. But I know your vision and the use case for it is much bigger than the community that's going to be your first, early adopters,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So tell me more about that.
So there's an interesting 2019 Stanford paper called the curb cut effect. When US military professionals went into World War II, and a lot of them unfortunately came back in wheelchairs, and a lot of this happened actually around the Berkeley area, which we're very close to. One of the major problems that they had was the city's infrastructure was not wheelchair friendly. And because there were large numbers of disabled veterans that were coming back home, it really became an issue. And so one of the first innovations that were done for that is called the curb cut. The curb is just a sidewalk. It's a platform that we call in India. The sidewalks have a lowering at the end of it.
Yes.
And that was invented, or that was made for the disabled vets. But very quickly what they started seeing was it helped moms with strollers. It helped delivery professionals with carts. It helped old people with walking sticks. And so the curb cut effect basically says that when you design products for an extreme user in this situation, keeping some of those design principles in mind, you actually have a much larger societal benefit. The audiobook was an invention that was invented for people with visual impairment, but you wouldn't think of it as being just for the visually impaired community.
We all use it today.
Captions on videos, which is on every single YouTube video today, were invented for the hearing impaired community, right? And you can find several examples of this. And so one of the core beliefs that we have is that by keeping this consumer in mind and by designing things that take these design considerations into account, we will hopefully end up building tools that will benefit larger society. It is yet to play out, but we are strong believers in that.
Got it. Tell me a bit about the tools.
The first tool that we're building is around emails. I think the core problem type statement that we're solving is when you have visual impairedness of different sorts, and especially severe visual impairedness, your ability to read and write text is the first thing that starts getting affected. And email is the primary communication tool in the workplace. If you cannot email people, you're essentially cut off with all communication to all your colleagues, whether they are sighted or not. And without the ability to communicate, you cannot be productive. And which is why we're starting with an email product, trying to make it a lot more accessible. A quick note on email is that there are probably about north of 2 billion emails sent on a daily basis.
And I know most of the voice to text today is not great. It's so challenging even for someone like me. Right. Maybe it's the accent. Maybe it's just where the tech is right now, right? How much of it gets accurately captured when I dictate an email, right? And the number of times I have to go back and edit a few things. So I can just imagine the problem is multifold for someone with a visual challenge, right? I hear you when you say when you solve for the extreme user, I can totally see how something like this will come into everyday use for most of us. Right? It just makes it so much more efficient to draft, send, and respond to emails, right?
And that is the core belief. The core belief is Gmail works for the 95 to 98% of people that it satisfies. It's the largest product in the space between Gmail and Outlook. Gmail really, Outlook is pretty large when it comes to enterprises, but between Gmail and Outlook, they take really majority of this. The reason why we have to do this is because Gmail has to build kind of this least common denominator that works across the large 2 billion people. And what we are doing for is the small minority, which is between 1 and 5% of people, starting with visual disabilities. You can almost imagine people with neurodivergent illnesses, whether you have dyslexia or ADHD, you still have problems comprehending text, reading text, making sense out of it. Then you have the older population who are not as tech savvy, who would like a more natural interface to talk to. So you can almost imagine this natural progression of users. We're trying to use mediums that are beyond the visual mediums, like audio, to be able to do the entire job of being able to read as well as write and take action on email. Let's just call it triage. Triaging email is a huge use case that we are currently focused on.
Fabulous. And tell me about your co-founder and what sort of like a 6-month game plan with this.
We are funded by South Park Commons, who've written the pre-seed check for us. And I met my current co-founder at South Park Commons 6 months ago. We joined South Park Commons the same day. His name is Mikhail Markin. He's a really talented ex-Google engineer, and he's also a world champion skydiver. We have the core set of values. We care about having a deep positive impact on people's lives, which is what we are doing with our product. We are not trying to replace humans. We're trying to augment humans and make them better. It's part of our core philosophy. But the next 6 months for us is to get a core email product working with a small group of users who use it every day. That's what I'm spending.
That's the first
90% of my time right now doing. Yeah,
that's amazing. I love the vision. I love the vision with Luminade. I think it's amazing, and I totally hear you when you say the use case is much bigger.
Yeah.
So if you were to share a framework, like world over, right?
Yeah.
India, you're seeing a lot of people trying to start up. This is the startup capital of the world. This is even more here, just in the San Francisco Bay Area. There's people in New York. There's people out in Europe, right? So many people trying to do a startup. So, and you've had now I feel like this is almost your third experience.
Yeah.
Right? Third or fourth even. So if there was a framework you would set now, saying that if you're starting up, here are the things you should be asking yourself, right? What would those set of questions and that framework look like?
I think at the core of it, the question to ask actually is this a space that I would like to play in for a while without seeing any outcomes?
Yeah.
And eventually, is it okay if I see no outcomes?
Yeah. So it's interesting that you say that, because I was having this conversation with my team. So I used to run a talk show that had, one of the early YouTubers, right? In India, award-winning show, over 10 million views, nearly 40,000 subscribers. And then 7 years ago, I stopped because I was just burning out doing the content and trying to build what is now the tech-enabled agency that I run. And it took me a year of soul searching. And I kept asking myself, is this the time? Is this for me now? Can I commit the next 10 years to this if I start this? Right? Why do I want to do this now? Who am I talking to? What is it that I want to talk about that's relevant to who I am, that I can keep talking about for the next 10 years?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I did a lot of soul searching. So the first question is, why do this?
Why do this?
Right? Why do I want to do this? And can I do this for the next, let's say, 10 years?
Yes.
Right?
And being very honest with yourself, at least in my sense, I wanted to do something where, where a lot of resources were not going into it, right? The space that I'm operating in.
A bit of a white space that you can build something interesting for.
For two reasons. One is that then that customers actually ignored and you can build something. And then there's also a competitive advantage where I'm in a space that people don't understand. And I'm in the space where I feel that level of confidence that people don't understand it the way I do. And so I have a unique edge there, right?
Yeah. The second question is white space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is this a big enough or clear enough opportunity that's not too overcrowded?
The answer to that comes in what is the unique perspective that you bring to the space. And if there is a unique perspective, if your perspective is the same as everyone else's, if the insight is the same, then it just becomes purely an execution play. And then your question is that if everyone has the same hypothesis, then you better be the best in the world, and you better have the ability to get the best in the world in terms of capital.
To out-execute everybody else.
To out-execute everyone else. But if you want, and I think to some extent that becomes table stakes beyond a point anyway. I think because once people realize what their insights are, everyone's going to kind of run behind it. Yeah. And so you have to do it. But at least you have that differentiator and that
at least you lead for a couple of years.
You need to have some insight that is different, which you can leverage to build a differentiated product or business.
And in your case, it's built on your own experience.
It's my own experience. Yeah. It's my experience spending time with the community that I deeply understand. And so, and that is kind of the wedge that we're going with.
Got it. What's the third question?
I think the third question is that do you have the ability to put together some of the ingredients in the beginning to be able to make this successful, which actually comes down to, are you able to sell? And the selling here is people sometimes conflate selling only to customers. You actually first have to sell it to yourself.
Yeah.
And then you have to sell it to
A
your
co-founder.
close family. It starts with like you have to sell it to your close family.
Yeah.
You can have a partner that says, I'm not going to like be willing to deal with, having no money for the next 10 years, right? Which is what the reality, which is how you have to present it.
It could be as bad as that. Yes.
Yes. People start by presenting the best case scenario. I would start by presenting the worst case scenario. If we have an incredible exit in 3 years and we're all rich, trust me, we don't have to practice for that. When we get a lot of money, we don't have to practice for that. You have to get ready for the worst and hope that something else happens along the way. And that hope is grounded on your execution and everything else. And so the real question within all of this is like, what is it? Right? Like what first question is like, what do you deeply feel? The second question is that you have to start selling to, you have to give kind of like a real picture to the people around you, sell it to your co-founder, sell it to the first set of employees, sell it to your first customer, and sell it to maybe an investor, right? And depending on what you're able to do, you have ingredients. Some people have the ingredients of going and raising a bunch of capital right up front. That is their leverage. They've been able to sell that to an investor. Maybe it's because of track record. Maybe it's because of something else. But they've been able to do that. So you have to be realistic enough to say, what do I have that I can pull together to be able to make it happen? In most cases, for a young founder who has not done much before, you either have to build and show and sell.
Yes.
Or you have to be incredible at storytelling, where someone might believe in you, but even then the bill is due pretty soon, where people will want to see, some traction or something else. And so mostly I would say, pick your area of competence based on what you deeply care about and what you are able to do. And then convince someone to get on the journey with you, because doing the journey alone is very, very hard, whether it's your co-founder or your first employee. Convince them to come on board, and and then we'll see what happens.
Something interesting you were talking about, right? The learnings from the first time around.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, your personality and my personality is also that. I like learning while doing things. I'm not just going to read and learn. I will try things out hands-on. Some things I will read and absorb.
Yeah.
But most of it comes with hands-on trying experience, right? It's a way of building and learning and doing.
Yeah.
And some people can look at it as an expensive way of learning too.
Yes.
That school of learning, that method of learning is an expensive way of learning.
Yes.
But I think we're also individuals who look at it and say, hey, but I mean, I have such deep lessons. I know why something will or won't work, right? And I'm better off or I'm richer coming into the second time around with those first set of hands-on experience. And that's why you see around us, there are enough examples, I think, of entrepreneurs who've failed the first time around and come back the second time around done beautifully well, right? Much bigger ambitions, much more funding, much more success. Yes, you do hear of those stories now and then where you're like, first hit wonder, but that's far and few between, right? There's a lot of, it's like going up a mountain. You first climb a couple of smaller hills, then you get to the base of the bigger one, then you climb the bigger one. It's like, there's a whole journey of it. And it almost feels like it's a lifetime's journey, not about that one hill or that one mountain.
Yes. I think the learn by doing is going to happen no matter what, because the situations are not going to be the same. The variables are going to be different. Where there is sufficient knowledge out there that you should imbibe that.
You leverage that.
And those are just like for example, like growing before you have product market fit is just not a great idea. It's just...
And it's practically also impossible. Where's the money going to come from?
Someone might give you the money. Like, you might get the money. I'm saying someone might give you... You may be such a great salesperson to an investor that someone might give you a couple of few $1 million. It's not hard to imagine that in a place like Valley or in Bangalore today, right? Like, you'll get some amount of money depending on your ability to sell. Now, but if you go and you burn all that cash before you build a strong foundation of a product that actually works and there's retention and all of that, if you go and start spending money acquiring users, that's mostly always going to fail. You don't need to learn that lesson again by yourself. And it's also, I would call as like, it's an expensive lesson to learn because you're going to burn a bunch of money when you're small. $1 million is probably all you have. And if you're going to burn a large part of that money trying to acquire users when you don't have a product, you've just wasted an opportunity. And you're not probably going to get this opportunity again because investors are going to see that investors will invest back in you if they think that you invested the money in the right way and you may have still failed and that makes sense.
I feel a lot of the times the mistake may be the other way around, not so much about acquiring customers, but continuing to build and continuing to make something perfect. That is even more common, I feel.
Which is why there is a little bit of an art to this, right? The art to this is you have some conviction and then you kind of test it out. And so you're constantly in this thing of like doing and measuring what you're doing and you're like recalibrating. It's almost like a calibration step. And so there isn't a right or wrong. But like generally speaking, if you spend way too much time before talking to customers, or if you spend a lot of money
building something,
or marketing something before the product is ready, things are not going to end up very well for you. On the other hand, you could still have a product that customers really love and it doesn't end up doing very well. But the chances of that happening is much lesser if the customer genuinely really loves the product and like wants to keep it, right? And so it makes sense to order it in that direction.
Now, coming back to what I was asking, right, about this whole learning by doing, right? There are certain things that we've definitely learned by doing.
Yes.
And there are certain things that we've learned by observing.
Yes.
Or by reading,
yes.
Right? In your journey, what are the things that you've definitely learned by doing as opposed to by observing?
I think most importantly is just the how to build products that people actually want, right? You can only learn it by building products. It's like trying to go to school for like entrepreneurship or something. Because the mechanics of running a company you can learn from business school. The emotional side of running a company you cannot learn from business school. You have to learn it in the school of hard knocks by like actually doing it. Even things like how during a crisis, what is the consequence of telling your teams that everything's going bad? What happens to the morale? How do you do a layoff without everyone hating you? It's incredibly scary to sit in front of the people that you've hired and you've given all these promises to, and you're scared for them. You're scared about facing reality yourself, and you can't learn these things in a book. A book can teach you certain things, but like the reality of facing it is like very, very different. Like reading a book about laying off people versus going through the process of laying off people, extremely difficult.
Because it's also very personal and emotional.
Very personal, very emotional.
Everybody reacts differently.
Yes. I have seen everything from somebody incredibly upset and crying to people walking up to me and smiling and being like they've known that this was coming, to some people being incredibly angry at me for giving them false promises, even though I had no idea that was going to happen. But you, as a leader, you have to take and not make that about you. I wasn't the one that was fired in the moment, and you have to sit and respect that person and like take it all in. But at the same time, there is a tactical way of doing it, right? And that's another thing that you kind of learn during the job, which is like, I'll just taking an example of like laying someone off. Like when you lay someone off, you can't sit and dwell on that too much, because the more time you give them, the only question in their head is like, this is so unfair on me. Why did this happen?
Yeah.
And the why, it's
well beyond
impossible.
them. Yeah.
It's impossible for me to tell you exactly the why, because the why is just the things did not pan out the way we did. It is nothing personal. That is the reality. But because I'm letting you go.
Because it's an emotional thing for me, I will never accept a logical answer to that, right?
So that is one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is just building products that consumers actually want and love, right? And like, how do you build a system where you keep the customer at the center of it and you iterate on behalf of the customer? You identify the problems that the customer has, but you don't ask the customer for solutions. A lot of people will just be like, what would you like me to do? They're not the product designer.
Yes.
It's not their job.
Yeah.
It's your job. And if you do everything that the customer says, you will have to build a faster horse, right? Like going back to kind of the origin of Ford, if you had asked everyone in the US.
What they wanted then.
Not that they would say faster horse, but someone like Ford had to come and like invent the internal combustion engine and like build cars and manufacture them and all of that stuff. And so the core of keeping the customer at the center of it, identifying what really matters, building and validating that, and keeping and sort of almost merging what they're saying with what they're doing. And that is an entire art that you will only learn. You can learn a bunch of that through theory, but you will have to really hone those skills by building.
Trial and error. It's calibration, like you say, just constantly recalibrating.
It's the difference between like reading a book on karate and like actually doing karate, right? Like it's like...
Yeah. Fact is, as much as newer companies are coming up, raising money and growing, there's always change. There's always transition.
Yeah.
Right? There's always someone laying someone off somewhere. Someone who's quitting, right? Or being asked to leave. So there's change. And like you talked about, this urgency that you were talking about, saying, hey, we have to build this fast. We have to get this right fast, right?
Yes.
That's also because everything's moving so fast.
Yes.
Change is happening so fast.
Yes.
And it comes with a little bit of this, ruffling all the feathers and unsettling people, unsettling situations and contexts, right?
Yes.
Forcibly changing things and the shape of a business itself, right?
Yeah.
I think ever more than before, this conversation around layoffs and how to do it is something that a lot of entrepreneurs would love to hear your thoughts on.
It's incredibly hard to do layoffs. It's like, because you messed up. That's what a layoff is, right? Layoff is like, as the company, you messed up, and you can always say that the market forces weren't aligned or whatever. But the reality is like, something happened, you overhired or you underperformed, or something happened, market forces changed, and you had to lay off a percentage of your team. I think that the big lesson on layoffs for me, in terms of, more than what went right, I'll talk about what went wrong, because like that's kind of what you want to kind of not
learn
do.
from, I suppose. Yeah. But also the interesting thing is like, you were an entrepreneur, but when you laid off people at Byju, you were more of an employee rather than the entrepreneur.
Yes.
Did that also make it a little less personal for you, or did it make no difference for you?
It made it very personal because I personally hired them. So it was really personal. There's obviously I have a job to do, and so I can't let you feel the emotions, and you give the people your numbers and let them know that they can contact you after, and like you try and like do a bunch of things to get them back on their own feet and try and undo some of the pain as much as possible. But it is still incredibly painful, right? As you're sort of going through it. I think all that you can do is be honest at the moment in terms of, this is the situation. We are in trouble a little bit, and hence we have to make these decisions happen. People will react in different ways. Obviously, many of them are scared. Going through a layoff process is like, it's like going through a breakup when you didn't realize that day you're going to go through a breakup. Right. And like this breakup also has like severe economic
implications, financial implications.
There are financial implications. People have loans. There were a lot of junior employees who did not have like the cushion. And so all of those things were incredibly tough. The other thing that I would generally recommend is that you don't want to do a lot of layoffs. You want to cut deep as much as you need to, but you want to cut deep and then you want to stitch it up and start the healing process. Because then what you can do is you can address the ones who are left, and you can give them hope.
Who have stayed. Yeah.
You can give them the motivation, you can give them the hope, and you can give them the prospect of a brighter future with the company.
So what you're saying is, if you're making a decision to lay off, be clear about what you need to do and go deep with it, even if it means like a higher number or a harder decision to make.
Yes.
Do it in one go instead of doing it in phases.
Yes, because you could just think about what happens to as an employee who has not been laid off. Because the first question I'm thinking is, when is my turn?
Yeah.
And if you want the company to get back in track and not be dwelling on the layoff, your job as the management is to give them confidence that this is the last one. If you don't give them confidence, what it basically means is we did one and now TBD. And that open-ended
gives a lot of anxiety, changes the culture. Yeah.
Because you can't move on. I'm just sitting here wondering, okay, what is the point of me writing this document if I'm just going to get laid off? And many companies had to lay off during COVID, right? Like Byju was not the only company that had to go through layoffs. Airbnb.
Byju was the only one that was hiring during COVID. They had the opposite.
Yeah, we had the opposite problem.
Yeah.
We were hiring everybody.
It was post-COVID that things changed, right? Yes. But today, if you see that there's a flux happening.
Yeah.
There's this hiring frenzy that's happening in AI, but there's also other industries that are impacted. At least from the surface, it looks like they're impacted because of AI. Or maybe a bunch of other contextual changes too. Maybe some of it is just like, okay, here's a reason to tighten things up and, leverage the information to go in a certain direction. So contextually, it's different in different companies, right? But it's I actually think in the last 10 years, if you look around us, it's a constant thing. Yeah. Hiring and laying off and hiring and laying off. It's become more commonplace for startups to go through those cycles. So even large, well-established enterprises, whether it's Amazon or,
Microsoft.
Yeah, exactly. There are cycles happening now.
Everyone's. If you do it in a dignified way, you will retain some brand loyalty because people understand. At the end of the day, people understand that, Airbnb famously had, during the pandemic, they had a huge down round. They had to make a massive cut. And if you look at how they've bounced back, Brian Chesky was a huge proponent of like cut deep enough so that you don't have to cut again. Because it's like, if you keep doing surgery, the body will react in very different ways. And I do think that is the right way of doing things. As a management, you have to realize what you have to do. Of course, easier said than done. These are very, very large numbers. But you should always aspire to do it in a way where, the ones who remain. Because when you go out and you've just had a layoff in the company, people are going to be telling you, including your family members, are like, why are you staying in a company? You're probably going to be fired next. You need enough information and motivation to be able to say that, no, I think this is the last one. We've been informed about it. And I think it's going to be okay. Of course, things may still happen. But people should not get a sense that I actually don't think that they have their ship in order, and I actually think that it's going to happen a lot more. So you want to set expectations clear that things were wrong, we corrected it, we are back up, and now if you have any concerns, go and talk to your manager, and things will be resolved, right? Rather than it being like, okay, we're done with this one, and then you're like, is there a next one? And we don't know.
You, in this whole process, you also have to deal with your own emotions around it, right?
Yeah.
There might be a lot of guilt or disappointment or anger or frustration or anxiety even, having to deal with people so up close and personal. And, like you were talking, different people react differently and it's so personal, right? So how do you maneuver your own emotions through the whole thing?
So when you're at the job, you can't make it very emotional. If you have to lay off 50 or 100 people or something like that over a few months, it's like it does become a job, but you're trying to make each one as less painful as possible in the process. So you were talking about one of the other learnings, and one of the other learnings is how you treat people through your career affects how you want to do the next thing. If you want people, whether it's your investors or whether it's your team members or co-founders or whoever, to kind of want to keep doing business with you over a long period of time, people expect a level of, whether you call it professionalism, whether you just call it being a good human being or whatever, right? At the end of it, it's like let's not be shady, let's be honest. This is not going to be the last working relationship. We're going to be doing more things. And so you want to carry forward that reputation. And if you have a reputation of someone who's just willing to say whatever to just get out of the situation, that doesn't span out. People don't want to work with you over a long period of time. People don't want to be in the trenches with you because they don't trust you. Because you're going to war together, you have to know that the person next to you actually
Has your back.
Has your back. And even if it is hard times, I may still lay you off because the company is unable to pay your salary. But if I do it in a way where I don't care, or if I'm not trying to like help you after that then you start wondering, why do I work with this person the next time around? And you start losing a bunch of people.
Yeah. So you're saying be professional at work. But what about handling your own? Okay, and you talked about how to go about it, but there are also emotions that you're going through, right? So how do you cope with that? What did you feel at that time? What did you feel, and how did you cope with it?
Just horrible, because you are disappointing. Because like all the stakeholders are disappointed, right? Like starting from your customers are annoyed and disappointed. The team is annoyed and disappointed. Your co-founders, everyone in all the teams are like going through a really horrible period, and so a lot of it is just like feeling bad. But you have a job to do. And so I can go home and feel a little sad about what happened, but to get up in the morning and go back to work and continue that process until it's done. And
because that's the commitment you took on. That's the path you chose.
That's the path that I chose.
And you're answerable for your choices, and you stick it through.
You have to because because you had to kind of do those things. And once, at least for me, what I was very clear of was that I did not want to take another responsibility within the Byju's ecosystem. If this was not the product, like I was like, because I'd taken it took me a long time to like learn and understand this segment and like do all of those things. And eventually when it didn't work out, it also felt weird. I don't know, maybe this is like a more a personal angle to it, which is it just felt weird for me to like lay off the whole team that I hired and still continue in the company. Like that, there's something very off about that. And so I'm not saying like that was like a great decision or something. It was just like something that felt off. And so I just eventually felt like the right thing for me to do in that meeting where I was letting everyone go is to be like, I'm also leaving, because I don't think the company is going to benefit from me being around and paying my salary and stuff like that. So it's not going to be useful. And so, so that was at least that was like all of us looked at each other like we tried. And we felt like a team between us. It wasn't like, sorry guys, don't need you anymore, and like you can move on. It was more like we gave it a great attempt. We did a bunch of really good work. There was a lot to be done. We couldn't get to it. We wanted to have an incredible impact on education. We had lot more to do. There are many companies doing it right now, but it was a shot. Sometimes you take shots that don't work out, and it was okay.
Sriram, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
I mean, it's amazing to see you. I still consider a young person. Okay.
Thank you.
A young person with such a rich life experience. I think you're standing on some very solid ground for what you're going to build next. So I wish you all the best with Luminade.
Thank you so much, Lakshmi. This is great.